Okay, my name is Rachel Yehuda. I'm thrilled to be here with you. I actually work at Mount Sinai School of Medicine and the Bronx VA, where we have a center for psychedelic-assisted therapy in both locations. And my interest in psychedelics is relatively recent compared to probably a lot of people that come to Horizons. But now it seems like I've been doing it forever. But actually, our center opened up in maybe 2021. And before then, I actually had a complete life. You know, I really doing research on the biology of trauma and PTSD and intergenerational trauma, concentrating a lot on the epigenetics. And I had done a lot of drug trials in the 90s when a lot of people were very interested in pharmacotherapy for PTSD. Got disenchanted with that, actually, for reasons that I hope we can also talk about. But then kind of found this, and yeah, I'm really delighted and actually feel privileged to be able to be doing this work and joining this community that existed way before I ever heard of it. So thank you for having me.
And are there any sort of associations or conflict of interest or any disclosures? Do you have any conflicts of interest in discussing this?
I don't make any money outside of my salary in terms of this industry. So the answer would be no.
Okay.
Yes.
Understood. Dr. Rao, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me here. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. So my name is Srinivas Rao. I am the Chief Scientific Officer and co-founder of a company called Atai. So Atai is focused on mental health. We're a drug development company. We have compounds that are psychedelic. We have partnerships that are involved compounds that are psychedelic. We have non-psychedelic drugs in development as well. That's also my disclosure. I'm a full-time employee at that company. How did I get here? That's an interesting one. So yeah, background's MD, PhD, did my internship, realized somewhere along the way I didn't have any patience for patients, so it was time to go do something else. I'm originally an engineer. I mean, my PhD is in neuropharmacology, but originally an engineer, so I like practical problems to solve. And that's what got me into drug development, and actually very much on the entrepreneurial side, started a couple of companies previously. Really like the multivariate problems and trying to bring a drug to market, and the regulatory side, the science, the intellectual property, and everything else. As for psychedelics themselves, always been involved with this sort of pharmacology. In fact, a lot of my PhD work was around 5-HT2A. And did a lot of work in chronic pain and other indications as well as mental health. And there's a lot of overlap there. So this is something that was intellectually very interesting to me, was personally interesting to me. I've suffered certainly from mood disorders for a very long time, and have 2 kids on the spectrum, so it's challenging at home. So it's something that was very personal to me, this was the only class of drugs that really worked for me, to be honest with you. I've tried a lot of things in the past, but it really didn't do too much. So that's why I'm here. I want to get these out to people that could benefit, like I did.
Dr. Rao, what is your general position on the question of the role of psychotherapy or the centrality of psychotherapy in psychedelic medicine?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one. So personally, I think there's a lot to be gained by this, but we have to kind of define some terms here, because psychotherapy is out there, psychological support is out there. They sometimes mean different things to different people. Psychotherapy, in my mind, tends to be a little bit longer term. I don't know about you. Psychosocial support seems to be right around the administration of the compound, so it's like the prep, the actual dosing time, as well as the integration session. And at some point that blends. It seems to blend into more longer-term therapy. So as a general statement, I think it's having, this is a very unique experience, particularly for the uninitiated, myself included. It was a very unique experience. It's important to have some prep work, I mean, to really explain this is not like another SSRI or something like that. So that's important. What comes up should be integrated back in. I mean, if things do come up, it's worthwhile having that discussion with the patient and make sure they're in a good place. So I think generally it's, from a personal perspective, it's important. The FDA's perspective is an interesting one. They don't regulate therapy, just so we're clear. And their angle in their draft guidance is that you can include it, but we don't really have any empiric data. We don't have any true evidence one way or another around psychological support and/or therapy, and they actually blur the terms a little bit themselves. So it's a pragmatic, scientific approach. Can't disagree with that. I mean, we are, in our trials, we are certainly incorporating psychosocial support, if not necessarily longer-term therapy.
Dr. Yehuda, what is your opinion about the centrality or necessity of psychotherapy in psychedelic medicine?
Well, first of all, please call me Rachel.
I just figured if I was calling him Dr. Rao, I should call you Dr. Yehuda.
Srini works.
Because there's nothing worse than inequality in this. Well, there are things worse. Rachel, tell me how you feel about this. I know you have feelings.
I do have feelings.
As a psychiatrist talking to a therapist, I know you have feelings. Tell me your feelings.
I see how this is going to go. All right.
Well, I'm going to basically start from the premise that the psychotherapy is a critical, non-negotiable ingredient in psychedelic-assisted therapies, not necessarily in psychedelic experiences. If you want to have a psychedelic experience for whatever reason you want to have one, you don't have to bring your therapist.
Right. Okay.
But if you have a psychological problem or a psychiatric condition, and you are trying to use the power of these therapeutic tools, these drugs, in order to help you identify the material that needs to be discussed and deal with the material that needs to be discussed, and look at the material in a way that allows you to be compassionate towards yourself and curious instead of just pushing it away, which is what we all do with our psychological material. And if you don't have the psychotherapy, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have a lot of stuff swirling around. You're going to have maybe even a very interesting experience, but you're not going to be able to take the material that comes up and really put it where it belongs in a context. And so sometimes, no offense to my MD, some of my best friends are MDs, but sometimes when an MD talks about psychotherapy, well, psychological support, that's kind of like psychotherapy. That would be like me saying, well, surgery, kind of involves a knife and maybe some anesthesia. Maybe, but it's optional. But it isn't, because it's core. And so one of the reasons that I got so excited about this is because I had felt for a long time that in psychiatry in general, and certainly in trauma and PTSD, which is my area, we have bifurcated pharmacotherapy on the one hand and psychology on the other hand, to the point where the same people aren't even doing it, let alone talking to each other about what's happening in the patient's experience. And this was a way to kind of bring them together again so that you can leverage the power of a medicine and the power of psychotherapy in a way that neither can do on its own. So yes, it's as integral as my right hand is to my left hand.
I want each of you to talk a little bit about some indications where it seems pretty obvious that this is a clear indication where you need psychotherapy, but maybe there are some other indications where it's not so clear and you can get away with less. Dr. Rao, do you have a sense of maybe which diagnoses or even which substances clearly maybe fall into different camps, or are you making a case that they could all fall in one camp?
No, I don't think. I'm certainly not making that case. And I think, MDMA is certainly unique. There's more interaction. The patient may be more interactive. So there could actually be some degree of therapy, quote unquote, real therapy that's going on in that process, right? With psychedelics particularly, we tend to be focused on the short acting. I heard rapid acting earlier. I think they're all kind of rapid acting, but really more the short acting side. The experience can be pretty intense. The patient's kind of inward until they come back out. And it's not, I mean, you got to have someone kind of watching over them, make sure things are safe, of course, but it's a relatively short experience. So I think it is different by drug. I certainly think it's different by indication. If there's, I think MDMA's unique feature is the ability to really allow you to process trauma, right? I mean, I think that's fundamentally it, to really be able to face it head on. That is probably something that you really want to have, if it comes up, it's going to take some work to get it reintegrated into your life. There was a recent study that was done with LSD in generalized anxiety disorder. There was very limited psychological support in that context. And that might be okay. I mean, for many of the folks that have generalized anxiety disorder, some may have trauma of some kind, others may not. It seemed to go okay. And it should also be noted that Compass just announced some results that was alluded to earlier today. That had comparatively less therapy. It's an open label study, so caveats apply compared to MAPS's double-blind placebo-controlled studies. But nonetheless, it was a much shorter sequence just by virtue of the fact it was a single administration of drug. So I think it was 3 before and 2 visits after. So again, the part of the problem is there's not a lot of data on this. I think empirically, I'm all in, but I'm a scientist, and it's like, all right, well, we should go get some data around this to really understand, not only how much, but what is the appropriate thing to do. And we have Jennifer Tippett in the audience here, who I work with at Atai, who's a therapist, really kind of taking it apart. It's like, what are the elements that you really need for this patient, for this indication and this drug?
So same question to you, Rachel. Do you see indications where it's non-negotiable, there has to be therapy, but maybe other indications or other drugs where it's more negotiable? Where do you stand on these things?
So by an indication, you don't mean like going to Burning Man, right?
I mean indication like there's a diagnosis, there's a substance used, and then there's whether psychotherapy is absolutely required or would be nice or maybe isn't necessary at all. And I mean, can you make a case for any of those things?
I don't want to make a case for any of those things, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's the responsible thing to do, and I'm not convinced by the rationale that underlies the whole discussion about it. Because let's get real. The rationale for trying to see if we can get away without the psychotherapy is, if you want the cynical version, to make more money in a drug company, because if we don't need the psychotherapy, then we don't.
That hurts. That
It's
hurts.
Very good.
I said, let the record state that I said no.
Right. That's the cynical
Said no. That's the
version.
cynical
That was
version.
cynical. Okay.
But the non-cynical version of that is, access. That if we if we basically make the argument that the psychotherapy isn't necessary, then a lot of people will be able to use it because they won't need right now a very rate-limiting step in the service delivery. Then, again, I'm sympathetic and I understand the rationale, but it makes me want to dig in deeper, because the possibility that somebody might take a psychedelic but need the support and not have it might be a safety concern.
I agree.
So I'd rather start out with the idea that, you probably need it. And if you come out of the experience saying it was great, but I didn't really need the therapist, that's fine. Nothing, no harm, no foul. But if you're in a situation where a lot of stuff comes up for you and you don't have anyone to deal with it with, then have we really made this a better situation? Now, I understand if you're industry that it's like a really big pain to try to talk the FDA into a new compound when they don't even know what psychotherapy is. Is it support, like my analogy before? they don't even know what it is, and so therefore they're not going to regulate it because they can't tell the difference between this directed, non-directed, that, the other. It's all the same what you guys do, right? So, and I also agree with you that we don't have a lot of research.
Right.
The question is, what do you do in the absence of knowledge? Do you go the safe route? Or do you say, well, there isn't research that compels me to do the psychotherapy, so let me not do it? Or do you say, well, there's no research that compels me to do it, but what is the adverse outcome that will occur if we decide not? And I guess the other reason that I don't want to really go down that argument thing is because, I've been around for a long time because of my age.
I've also been around a long time because of my age. What have you learned?
And what I've learned is that just taking a medication alone for a psychiatric indication isn't like the best card to play. And I just wish our field would say, mea culpa on this, because people need more than a discussion about their side effects. When they talk to a physician who is prescribing them something, they actually do need to talk about the stuff. And so I want this movement, this field, what we're doing here together, to be corrective to those mistakes and not perpetuation of those mistakes.
I think that's a good point. That is a very good point. I do think that the area of accessibility is really important, and like what it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, how many people you can get through the protocols and things like that. And obviously, if you're doing less psychotherapy, it's sort of quicker and easier. And there may be some substances, some patient populations where the psychotherapy is less important. I definitely, I do think MDMA is unique. I agree that, the thing I always say about MDMA is I could not design a better drug to be a catalyst for psychotherapy. So to me, it is kind of a waste to not have the psychotherapy piece in place whenever possible. On the other hand, I think many of us have had potentially therapeutic or positive or enriching experiences with MDMA or with other substances or psychedelics where we feel like we have benefited from them even though we did not have intensive psychotherapy. So it's nice. It's nice to have it. I think it's imperative that there's screening and prep and integration after. But for some substances sometimes you can't even really talk.
Right. No, exactly.
There's not a lot of talking going on, but certainly whatever comes up after. I have certainly worked with patients who, particularly with ketamine, where they were given IV ketamine and there wasn't a lot of talk during and there wasn't much integration after, and it was not pleasant or particularly successful. So I think therapy helps. And it's in some cases it's like a nice to have and a luxury, but in other cases it's absolutely essential.
Can I respond to some of them?
You can both. Wait, I'm gonna let Rachel go first, and then Srini. Yes.
Yeah, when you say we've had the experience, I don't know if you mean like we or our patients or we as providers. But if we mean we as ourselves, I just want us to take one moment about our extraordinary privilege in understanding that we have access to things that maybe the average patient that might think this is a quick fix, because that's what we keep saying, will have as they engage with these medicines, potentially on their own if we send that message. So I just, I think that that's really important, because I think in this arena, most people who are curious about psychedelics as therapeutics have had the experience of being helped by psychedelics themselves. But you have to understand that you may not be representative of the people that really might have much more serious, not only psychiatric or psychological problems, but also be in environments where they don't have access to a problem should one occur. And so, again, I know I'm being very conservative, but I think that I have spent my entire professional life at the Bronx VA, at a VA, where the people that I've interacted with, I mean, we're the safety net between, I don't even know how to say it, a lot of these people really struggle with just a lot of basic things. And I don't think that the ability to go to some kind of psychedelic dispensary in the future would serve them. I just don't. Even if maybe it would help a little with something, I think the need to kind of improve and change and make a change in the way you live and all of those things that psychedelics do promote would have them feel very chained and unable, because without the resource of somebody helping them know how to put a change in place that they have identified as something that needs to change. But the other idea is that it doesn't necessarily have to be the person doing the psychedelic experience that would help the person make those changes afterwards. So we have to think about models of care in which you can warmly hand off someone to do work after a psychedelic experience. We have to just get very creative about it and not make this a binary discussion about yes or no.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the question around... Yeah, the question or the issue around privilege, I think, is a really critical one. So I have spoken about where I grew up, which was Southeast Kentucky, obviously. You know, in a coal town, and it just really had, I mean, even when when my parents left about 10 years ago, no therapists, no nothing. It's primary care basically is it. Very economically depressed, literally very depressed, high suicide rates, high unemployment rates. You know, I always think about that when I think about, getting stuff out to people. I live in San Diego. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But, out in rural Kentucky, it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's how do I scale it to the folks that need it? That not everybody lives in a major population center. So really understanding what is necessary and what's the minimum spanning set that's going to cover safety, it's psychological safety as well as physical safety, is important. And that is something that we can do, we can assess experimentally. So again, I'm all in on preparation and making sure the person's in a good place. These are different drugs, and if you're not going in with the right attitude and mindset, of course, that can be problematic. But seeing what happens the next day is equally important, right? So I'm good with that. I don't know, I mean, at that point, there will be folks that don't need anything, and there will be folks that need a lot, and that's, to me, okay. It has to get plugged into some kind of existing, more extended care for that patient if possible.
I understand the argument, but they don't pay the pilot to fly in good weather. And
They don't pay the pilot to what?
Fly in good weather.
Nice.
The idea is really that, when it goes great, it could just be a facilitator that has no psychological training. Mm-hmm. But if it goes not great, then you really need somebody there. I mean, we've had some really difficult experiences in our clinical trials where it could have gone very south if not for the level of skill and knowledge that the trained clinical psychologists and psychiatrists had in the room of also knowing to keep calm. I mean, when you're in a room when somebody is actually having a flashback, that requires a very special kind of training. Do you touch them? Do you not touch them? Do you ground them? Do you let them go? Do you let them follow their natural healing intelligence? Or do you have to know what to do. And that knowledge comes from years of experience and training of how to distinguish when somebody is having a state where you stand back and let it happen because they're actually safe and going through something, or they're losing connection with something and you gotta rein them in. And it's not fair to put people in a position where they might have to do that without the training, knowledge, and supervision that is required to do that.
Well, sure. But
Srini,
that's,
I'm actually going to interrupt you, and I apologize, but I want to put you on the defensive slightly, if I may. I want you to sort of address this basic concern that we kind of joked about before. This concern that the drug companies may be overly incentivized to minimize therapy, just to keep things simple with regulatory issues and to maximize scaling up. And the question I guess I want to ask is, like, how do we balance these sort of incentives with safety concerns? Like, where do you draw the line?
a compound that you put out in the market that ends up with lots of safety concerns is going to get withdrawn. Right?
It's going to get withdrawn.
Or it's not going to sell. If you're going to take it to, you want to take it to a strictly economic argument, that's where you would take it, right? I mean, the reality is drug companies aren't monolithic. I'm a doctor, right? It's just, that's how it is.
Yeah.
Most of the people that are running the trials are physicians. I mean, you know, certainly in charge of the trials. We have all the requisite skill set. We're not trying, I mean, there's, you know, we're trying to get these things out so we can help people. And it's great. I mean, again, I'm familiar with this space. Sure, I can drop $3 or $6 grand to go up to, you know, wherever. That is not scalable. That is not scalable. And it's not going to, in fact, it's not going to benefit all those people in my hometown, right? It's just not. So we have to come up, I mean, absolutely maintaining, you know, there's lots of scenarios that keep me up at night, that come down to patient safety. The FDA does have some provisions for that around REMS. Adequate training, et cetera, is obviously pretty important. No one's arguing against properly trained staff. Again, considering the nature of these compounds. So, you know, safety is pretty critical to everybody in the industry. I mean, it's quite a cynical view, actually.
Atai is mostly developing psilocybin, I believe, and not necessarily MDMA, or what are you all doing?
Yeah, so we have a strategic investment in Compass. They're developing psilocybin. We have a strategic investment in Beckley. They're developing 5-methoxy.
5-MeO-DMT,
Yeah,
Beckley.
yeah, and then we have DMT. We actually have our MDMA, and we have Ibogaine as well.
You have your own MDMA? Who is that? Is that Atai or someone else?
No, it's ours. It's
and are
an
you looking
enantiomer,
at
so
a PTSD or some other
no
indication?
other indications. So MDMA is something called racemate. There's 2 different molecules in MDMA. Mm-hmm. They're like your hands. They're you know, not superimposable mirror images. And in the case of MDMA, the 2 enantiomers have markedly different pharmacology. And so we've been doing testing with our MDMA, found a very unique profile that is differentiated from MDMA, mainly because you can't get to the doses of the racemate. When you stick both of them together, you get side effects from the other one. So we found a unique profile. We're trying to figure out where to take that right now. So that's something that we're looking at.
And you're not sure about which indications or diagnoses you may be looking at?
Correct.
And will there be therapy involved with that, our MDMA, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's something that we're looking into, and what the nature of that looks like. Yeah, and of course, you know, again, we're also taking into consideration the indications.
Can we talk a little bit about who may be doing the facilitating and who may be doing the therapy? And do you have an opinion about that at all? I mean, there are people in social work, psychologists, counselors, psychiatric nurses, social workers, other clinicians, non-clinicians. Do you have any strong feelings about who who should not be doing this? Dr. Yehuda?
Me, strong feelings? I don't know. Yeah, but they're going to be different than what you think. I think that there's a real kind of paradox that sometimes the people who really know how to work with someone in an altered state may not have the traditional education that you receive in medical school or graduate school or social work school or nursing school or any of those things. So I think that's going to be the hardest thing. Having those degrees does not make you qualified to assist somebody who is having an altered state in the capacity of healing. That's the irony. So the workforce, thank you. The available workforce is an illusion, even though they have like the malpractice insurance and all of that stuff, because working with somebody in an altered state actually requires a negation of some of those things that you learned.
A negation? Is that what you said?
Yeah, some of the things that, and I saw this very well when we did our first training of therapists in the VA. I mean, they would say things like, well, they would see some of the videos and say, well, I would just take the person to the emergency room that's having a dissociation. And I would say, why? They're in a room with you safe.
Right.
You know? Like, what is the emergency room going to do? So there's a lot of, you know, the whole touching thing, a lot of things that make a conventionally trained person really in need of the kind of education that many people have that have been doing this work even without a degree. So I think we're in a funny moment of needing to re-educate the workforce that is credentialed and use a lot of the skills that people that don't have credentials have.
Yeah.
And yet find a way to make those people able to operate within a medical context with the kind of requirements that are involved in that. And I don't know how exactly that looks, but that is our challenge.
And Rachel, do you feel like there's any sort of a need or at least a measurable benefit if the facilitator for the dosing session is also the therapist who sees the patient long term for prep and integration? Or how do you feel about the sort of handoff?
I think gone are the days where you could go to a psychiatrist who just takes care of your mental health needs as a one-stop shop. I always think that that's ideal if the psychiatrist is trained to also do the psychotherapy. Now, in the good old days, they were. Increasingly, it's about receptor this and receptor that. And that is really to the patient's misfortune. But if that's where we are, then yes, we have to be pragmatic, and there may be a need to have certain features of psychedelic therapy be done by a team that hopefully works together, but maybe people do different parts of the team. I'm open to all of it, and I think that for some drugs where you don't need to talk a lot or you can't talk a lot, it is different, but the idea is to really understand when somebody is in crisis, which sometimes you can't know if you don't know. And so again, how important is that? How broadly will it apply? It'll depend on the indication. How seriously ill is the person who is embarking on this experience?
Yeah.
And that is, again, everything is nuanced in a world where nothing is anymore. But here, you know, we have to apply this level of nuance to the problem, because a lot of people are going to want psychedelics, and they don't all need the same level of anything.
Right.
Yep.
Srini, on the whole opposite side of that spectrum, I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about whether there may be a role for technology in the pre and post support, or might telehealth or AI or chat meet some essential needs for safety, for identifying those that need more or need a further referral. What do you think about all of that?
Yeah, no, that's an area that I've been quite interested in for some time now. So one of the challenges in general with therapy, I think we all agree of the importance of it in different contexts. It doesn't need to be a psychedelic context, but the trials are challenging because there's that human-human element, right? So a person may be a very good therapist, but just doesn't get along with someone, or just the patient doesn't get along with them, and it's just not a good rapport. For a different patient, that might work quite well. So it's been tough. I mean, there's been plenty of trials that have been sort of a little on the, that haven't been as robust. The results haven't been as robust because of that variability. So, I mean, again, trying to find what you actually need to adequately prepare somebody to make sure that this is going to be an effective experience for them is something that could be done in a more standardized fashion. I mean, there are other companies that are looking at heavy training for the individuals to standardize things, right? And the alternative is to provide something like an app that could do that. I think telemedicine is going to be critical again, going back to the hometown example. But even with youth, there's a big spike in mental health issues with younger individuals, and they're many of them, not all obviously, but many of them are more comfortable using apps and or using some sort of telehealth thing. It's less intimidating. So that in fact, in some situations, making it almost pure chat so you don't have to look at someone is actually beneficial for the children. I was at a conference the other day where they were talking about there was a number of individuals that were I guess they were adolescents and right around there. They didn't really want to see a face on the other side. They wanted to do this via text. So I think it's just again I think these all play an important role, and again they'll be pretty critical for scalability. AI, LLMs could be very useful there too, but I think it's early days for that, honestly. I mean, I'm not viewing any of this as replacement, just so we're really clear. I'm viewing this as augmentation, right? This is the Mech Warrior robot suit for a therapist that allows them to work with more patients and more patients in parallel. I mean, I think that's the way to think about it. In the end, if something's really going sideways, yeah, you're going to need somebody to jump in.
A human, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. Until we hit AGI, but yeah, no.
This singularity that's talk for another conference,
Yes.
probably. I am assuming you have opinions about this.
Well, one of my secret pleasures is AI.
Your secret pleasures?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
I have
sorry?
like talks with my chat GPT. And every now and then I ask it a question and it responds back to me. I am a well-trained algorithm. Perhaps you should seek a mental health provider.
Yeah.
And you're not the only one using ChatGPT as a therapist, just to be clear.
Yeah.
So people have been doing that, even though it's absolutely not set up for that.
Oh,
so.
no. I think that it is, again, one of our challenges. We have a lot of challenges of how to take this very incredible technology and figure out how to use it safely. I don't think that we should ignore new developments or new technology. I just think that we want to be able to integrate them rather than abandon what we have and run to them exclusively. So I'm all about having a thoughtful conversation about how to use it. At this moment, I don't exactly see how that works. If a child doesn't want to interact with a person and wants to interact with a text, I don't know if we should collude with that or we should identify that as one of the things that is probably not good in our society.
Absolutely. It's about meeting the patient where they are, right? So at some point, there's a lot of social anxiety, particularly post-COVID. I have 3 teenage kids. So yes, I mean, ultimately, yes, I think you want them to be able to interact with people. But you mostly want them to start moving in the right direction.
Right.
So.
It's just, again, it's a challenge for us to be able to understand whether we're staging something because it's too far to get there from here, and this is our interim step that will help us link where we are and where we're going, versus, we don't really have to do it that way because we got this machine and we got this app and we got this technology, and I don't know if all of our technology is making us better, more compassionate, sensitive human beings that are looking at each other with nuance and understanding, really complex things.
Yeah, I'm not convinced anybody's just ditching stuff for the sake of ditching it. I mean, I know a lot of the other individuals at the companies, their chief medical officers, et cetera. They're all very thoughtful people. So they are working. I mean, they do a lot to make sure the patients are safe. you always have to, try and understand. I mean, in any field, there's a lot of dogma. I mean, any field. It is always worthwhile examining that. Particularly when you're, again, going back to the old engineering thing, it's like, we got a problem to solve. You got to take it all apart. And where can we optimize, right? To say that everybody needs X, Y, Z is not a good place to start, right, as an argument.
Right. So when we take things apart, I'm a scientist, I like to do that too. But one of the problems in the field of mental health has been reductionism. Sometimes when you take things apart too much, you end up thinking that psychedelics work because of a receptor somewhere in the brain and not because there are other components that are really making for a total experience. So that's another one of our challenges of how to take this apart like an engineer or a scientist to understand it without losing that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts and that the magic is in those things that we can't see that make something a whole rather than the sum of their parts.
Sure.
I'm wondering if either of you want to sort of opine or think about whether there's some sort of dream study or creative study where we can help sort of quantify everything we've been talking about. I don't know if it's like randomizing participants into like high or medium or low support groups and see how people do. Do you think it makes sense to actually try to study this, and if so, how would we do that?
I absolutely do think it's a worthwhile thing to do. And you can do it in a number of different ways. I mean, yes, you obviously, going back to the basics, you've got to make sure they're set, and you've got to assess them afterwards. And if you think there's a problem, you got to go deal with that, right? So certainly not advocating for walking away from that. But you can put in, I mean, we actually have had some internal discussions about that. What is sort of the minimum amount that one could do? And then build up from there and use that as one arm. We do need to understand these questions.
What do you think, Rachel? I know you're planning on doing a study at the VA where you're looking at like what's optimal for dosing.
Yeah.
Yes, the FDA just approved our dose optimization study, and
tell us about it.
Oh, it's great. We're going to be able to give from 1 to 5 doses of MDMA. Based on how people do at the end of each dose. So for some people it might be 1, for some people they might need 5, I don't know, 4. But it's a way to really see if we can understand this. But I wouldn't do a study where I look at with and without psychotherapy.
Right. I think
wouldn't do that.
Right. With MDMA and PTSD, I don't.
With any
it would be a
psychedelic,
disservice, I think, to look at no psychotherapy. But could you see other situations with other patient populations or other study drugs where it might make sense to sort of stratify it out and see how much it makes a difference? I'm getting lots of signals that we need to wrap up. I know you all have like fascinating questions, but we're not going to do Q&A, it looks like, for this. So hopefully my fascinating questions were enough. I know this is a little tricky. I really appreciate you guys sharing. I just want to support you psychotherapeutically.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Really good. So good.